Legal experts told True North that First Nations do not have the power to block a citizen-led Alberta separation referendum, even if treaty rights are involved. Premier Danielle Smith responds to outrage from treaty chiefs and defends her government's approach, stating that Indigenous rights will be respected, but democratic processes will continue. Smith also told Ontario Premier Doug Ford to butt out of Alberta's affairs after he criticized Western separatism. Meanwhile, NDP leader Naheed Nenshi launched a campaign accusing Smith of promoting separation, with similar pushback from Smith's Western colleague. However, Quebec sovereigntist praised her for standing up to Ottawa. Plus, True North has compiled a list of the key players organizing the push for independence, from grassroots groups to political parties. My name's Isaac Lamoureux, your host of the Alberta Roundup. We'll cover all of these stories and more today. Let's hop into that first exclusive now. Despite fierce criticism from Indigenous leaders and the Alberta NDP, legal experts say Indigenous leaders and communities cannot block a province-wide vote on separation. Canadian Constitution Foundation lawyer Josh DeHaas told True North there's nothing in the law that would give First Nations veto power over a referendum or the negotiations that would follow. He said, quote, "There is nothing I'm aware of that would suggest that First Nations people could prevent those discussions from taking place. Even where treaties exist within Canada, the law is clear, that it is the Crown that is sovereign and holds the underlying title to all of the land." DeHaas cited the Supreme Court of Canada's 1998 Quebec secession reference, noting that a successful referendum on a clear question would trigger a constitutional obligation for Ottawa and the provinces to negotiate the terms of separation. The legal clarification followed an emergency meeting of Treaty 6, 7, and 8 chiefs on Tuesday. During the meeting, Indigenous leaders denounced Smith and Bill 54, the legislation that lowers the bar for citizen-initiated referenda and lays the groundwork for a potential 2026 vote on Alberta's independence. However, Smith said her government is still many steps away from any potential vote and would not support any referendum question that infringes on treaty rights. At a Tuesday press conference, Smith said, quote, "You can't vote away treaty rights. You can't vote away Indigenous rights. You can't have a referendum on things that are enshrined in our various constitutional conventions and laws and court decisions." While Smith made it clear that her government would not put forward an independence vote, she said she would respect a citizen-led initiative if it met the 177,000 signature threshold under the new legislation. Constitutional lawyer Keith Wilson has also been outspoken about the impact of First Nations groups if a referendum vote were to occur. He said, quote, "Respectfully, the chiefs would benefit from legal advice. They don't have a veto on whether Alberta separates." Wilson noted that Indigenous communities could choose whether to maintain their current treaty arrangements with Ottawa, transition to new treaties with a sovereign Alberta, or negotiate an entirely new framework, but only if separation occurs. He clearly outlined the legal separation process in several of his posts to X. Firstly, any eligible voter would be able to vote in an independence referendum with no person or group receiving special treatment. Upon a successful vote, the province of Alberta, First Nations from Alberta, the other provinces, and the federal government are all legally required to engage in good faith negotiations to establish terms. Therefore, the First Nations would be able to remain with Canada and maintain the status quo, request that the new independent Alberta take them with the existing treaties, or negotiate new treaties with Alberta. The First Nations would make this decision for themselves. Wilson added that thanks to the 1930 Natural Resource Transfer Agreement, the government of Alberta owns almost all of the land and oil and gas in Alberta. A spokesperson for Smith told True North that she has stated unequivocally that she would commit to protecting, upholding, and honoring the rights of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Smith said, quote, "Any citizen-initiated referendum question must not violate the constitutional rights of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples and must uphold and honor Treaties 6, 7, and 8 should any referendum question ever pass. This is non-negotiable." For our next story, we'll cover Smith's defense from Eastern backlash over separation talks. Now, you might think this was from Ottawa, but it was actually Ontario Premier Doug Ford who was coming at Smith. She told him to mind his own business. Smith said, quote, "I don't tell him how he should run his province, and I would hope that he doesn't tell me how I should run mine. But we have a very respectful relationship, and I hope that continues." Smith threw a subtle shot right back at Ford. She said, quote, "In fact, I think we supported different people in the last federal election, suggesting that Ford, despite being a conservative premier, might have voted for Mark Carney. Smith's response came after Ford targeted the independence movement. He said, quote, "This is a time to unite the country, not people saying, oh, I'm leaving the country." As of right now, Smith predicted that just over 30% of Albertans would support a separation referendum. While it was initially expected that a separation referendum could occur at Alberta's next municipal elections in October 2025, Smith revealed this was unlikely given the new 120-day collection period up from the previous 90. She pledged that Albertans would see a referendum in 2026 if the legal threshold was met. Independent of that, Smith announced she would appoint a special negotiating team to represent Alberta in meeting with Ottawa. The group's goal would be to create a binding agreement called the Alberta Accord. The plan also includes Smith chairing the Alberta Next panel, which will consist of leaders in the judicial, academic, and economic spheres. The panel will conduct various online and in-person town halls to discuss Alberta's future in Canada and propose referenda. Despite not putting her government support behind separation, Smith defended the Albertans backing the movement. She said, quote, "The vast majority of these individuals are not fringe voices to be marginalized or vilified. They are loyal Albertans. They are, quite literally, our friends and neighbors who've just had enough of having their livelihoods and prosperity attacked by a hostile federal government." Smith's negotiating team will make various demands of the federal government, including guaranteed access to tidewater ports for Alberta's resources, Ottawa repealing federal legislation that hinders Alberta's energy sector, protection against federal export taxes without Alberta's consent, and equitable per capita federal transfers and equalization payments. The specific policy Smith demanded the federal government repeal included Bill C-69, aka the No More Pipelines Act, the oil tanker ban, the net zero electricity regulations, the oil and gas emissions cap, the net zero vehicle mandate, and any other federal law regulating carbon emissions, plastics, or infringing on the free speech of energy companies. Alberta beat the feds in court on both Bill C-69 and Ottawa's attempt to regulate plastics. Despite this, the Liberals have ignored the court decisions, according to Smith. Alberta also recently launched a new court challenge on net zero regulations, and the provincial government is preparing to challenge the energy production cap. While Smith was announcing the new teams on Monday, she explained that strong and free is more than just Alberta's motto. She said, quote, "We just want to be free. Free to develop and export the incredible wealth of resources we have for the benefit of our families and future generations. Free to pursue opportunities with the ideals of entrepreneurship, hard work, and innovation that have become synonymous with the name of our province." For our next story, we'll take a look at an intra-provincial feud taking place in Alberta. So despite Smith clearly distancing herself from the separatist movement, putting it in the citizens' hands, Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi has launched a campaign accusing Smith of pushing separatism. The campaign website, Separatist Smith, claims that Smith wants Alberta to leave Canada and is aggressively pushing a radical separatist agenda. It also urges Albertans to tell Danielle Smith to shove her separatism back in the closet where it belongs. Nenshi's push came after Smith clarified her non-involvement. She said, quote, "I specifically said we would not be bringing forward as a government a question on the issue of independence, so it would be up to individuals to draft that question and go through a process with lawyers that they might consult." Nenshi and the Alberta NDP have insisted the Premier's support for Bill 54 is equivalent to promoting separatism. However, Smith has also stated that she wants support for separation to go down, not up, and that she is focused on negotiating a stronger deal within Canada. NDP MLA Brooks Arcan-Paul claimed that Smith was already impacting Indigenous treaty rights simply by allowing a referendum framework to exist. Nenshi further alleged that while Smith unequivocally said no referendum would be allowed to infringe on treaty rights, every referendum question will infringe on treaty rights, according to him. While Smith is not advocating for any petition from her government, Nenshi has called on Albertans to sign his own petition on his new website. Constitutional lawyer Keith Wilson said, quote, "Disappointing to see Nenshi dismiss the value of democratic choice. Denying citizens a vote on critical issues reflects an authoritarian mindset prioritizing control over representation. While Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe has hinted that he too would support citizens making their own decisions on separation, BC Premier David Eby went the other direction. Like Smith, Moe said he'd rather strengthen the province within Canada, but he also noted how many Saskatchewanians did not support the Liberals in the federal election, and that a citizen-initiated referendum in Saskatchewan would be honored. However, BC Premier David Eby suggested that the two premiers, Smith and Moe, should instead rule with an iron fist, pushing back strongly against any kind of separatist sentiment in their provinces. Eby said any idea of BC separating was a non-starter. He said, quote, "But I certainly encourage them all, Premier Smith, Premier Moe, and I believe that they're on board for this, to work together for the good of the country, to hold the country together, and to push back strongly on any kind of separatist sentiment." Eby also took aim at Conservative MLA David Williams, who he said made a dumb move by sharing a Western separatist map. Freedom Convoy organizer Tamara Leach criticized Eby for sounding a little dictatorial and calling on the premiers to crush the Western independence movement rather than sit with them to understand their concerns. She said, quote, "This is exactly the attitude that contributes to the sentiment behind this movement. Not a single word about sitting down and exploring why so many Western Canadians are feeling completely alienated. Not a hint of having an open mind, finding common ground, or working together to find solutions." Believe it or not, Smith also got the support of an Eastern provincial party. Smith gained support from the Parti Québécois, the provincial Quebec Separatist Party, not to be confused with the federal Bloc Québécois. Party leader Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon said, quote, "This is a premier who has decided to address the government of Canada directly by saying, if you do not respect our democracy, you do not respect our financial choices and our priorities, I will respond to your abuse of power with concrete actions." Plamondon praised Smith's threat of a referendum to attain leverage over the federal government. The Parti Québécois launched referendums on Quebec sovereignty twice, in 1980 and 1995, both of which failed. However, Saint-Pierre Plamondon vows Quebec will see a third referendum by 2030 should his party form government after next year's provincial election. He also took shots at Quebec Premier François Legault through Smith. Plamondon said, quote, "What a striking gesture to see Danielle Smith do more in terms of autonomy and defense of her own province than François Legault has done over his entire mandate." For our last story today, we'll do a quick overview of a list that True North compiled on the key players behind Alberta's separation movement, from grassroots groups to political parties and influential online organizers. First up, the Alberta Prosperity Project is one of the largest educational organizations pushing for a referendum, and had just under 150,000 Albertans registered by Thursday. The project isn't a political party, but plans to begin the official 120-day signature collection process once it gathers enough pre-signatures and Elections Alberta gives approval of the petition. The project is advocating for Alberta to hold a referendum that would give the provincial government a mandate to negotiate its place within or outside of the Confederation. The group also advocates for the creation of an Alberta pension plan, Alberta police force, and provincial control over resource development, taxation, immigration, and employment insurance. Another petition, the Alberta Separation/Western Alliance petition, has been circulating on change.org for several years, and it recently found renewed attention. With over 225,000 signatures, the petition calls for Alberta and other Western provinces like BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba to enter survival mode and begin polling public support for separation from the rest of Canada. Although this petition holds no legal weight and isn't recognized under Alberta's referendum laws, the petition continues to generate significant online attention and speaks to a broader sentiment of Western alienation. Then we have the Republican Party of Alberta, which is a registered political party led by Cameron Davies. It supports joining the United States and was formerly known as the Buffalo Party. Davies has a colorful political history and has rebranded the movement with bold claims about Alberta's economic future under U.S. alignment. There's also the Wild Rose Independence Party, which was formed through the merger of Wexit Alberta and the Freedom Conservative Party in 2020. The new party is led by Jivan Mangat and supports a sovereign Alberta within a democratic framework. It recently co-hosted a sovereignty rally at the legislature in collaboration with the Independence Party of Alberta. The Independence Party of Alberta was founded in 2000 and re-registered in 2019, and it goes a step further. It wants to draft a provincial constitution and build Alberta's own military, justice system, and currency framework. Next is Take Back Alberta, the group that once reshaped the UCP from the inside. Founder David Parker recently wrote a piece titled "Alberta Separatism Must Succeed," laying out why the province needs to exit what he calls a nation in terminal decline. Parker said, quote, "Alberta deserves a future. If Canada refuses to provide one, we must build it ourselves. In the coming weeks, I'll make the full case for Alberta separation. The highlights: more money for Alberta pensioners, lower taxes for all Albertans, including corporate and income tax, and most importantly, a future outside of a nation in terminal decline." He added that Prime Minister Mark Carney is the greatest threat Alberta has ever faced. Online, several X accounts are helping build momentum for the movement, such as Alberta Secession Why, Alberta Separation, and Rise of Alberta. These accounts share legal resources, organize support, and combat misinformation, especially around Indigenous veto claims. From registered parties to digital campaigns, the Alberta sovereignty movement is no longer fringe. It's organized, well-funded, and quickly approaching the threshold needed to trigger a historic vote. That wraps up this week's show. My name's Isaac Lamoureux, your host of the Alberta Roundup. Have a great weekend. Thank you, and God bless.